What if the world as we know it is about to change, all because of a single, unprecedented decision by a powerful leader? Imagine this: a former president of the United States, known for his unpredictability and bold moves, has just taken a step that no one saw coming. What happens when a major world power like China faces a direct assault on its financial foundation? What happens when a sitting U.S. president freezes the assets of an entire nation? This isn't a hypothetical scenario, this is reality. And the man at the center of it all? Donald Trump. You might be thinking, Trump freezing Chinese assets? Is this even real? Yes, it is. Trump, known for his high-stakes strategies and brash political moves, has shocked the world yet again by taking this extreme action. If you thought the trade wars were intense before, this move raises the stakes to a whole new level. No longer are we just talking about tariffs and negotiations. We're entering a territory where financial resources are the weapons. Trump has escalated this confrontation into uncharted waters, and the implications are nothing short of massive. But why now? What's driving this sudden and bold decision? The timing couldn't be more critical, as global relations, economies, and trade agreements hang in the balance. In the face of growing economic pressure, the U.S. is trying to establish dominance in a new way, not just through diplomacy, but through economic power. Freezing Chinese assets isn't just a political maneuver. It's a high-risk gamble that could change the course of international relations forever. And the question on everyone's mind is, will this aggressive act bring China to its knees, or is it opening the door to an even more dangerous escalation? You might be wondering how such a move could even be possible, or what kind of ripple effects it could create across the globe. After all, China holds trillions of dollars in assets, and the financial world is intricately connected. What happens when these ties are severed? Could this spark a global financial crisis? And perhaps more importantly, what does it mean for the future of U.S. China relations? One thing is certain: this decision will have lasting consequences, and the entire world is watching closely. As Trump's decision to freeze Chinese assets sends shockwaves through the global financial landscape, the question on everyone's mind is, what happens next? The repercussions of such an unprecedented move are vast, affecting everything from international trade agreements to the stability of global markets. This is not just a confrontation between two powerful nations. This is a pivotal moment in world history that could redefine the future of global economics. The United States has long been a key player on the world stage, but Trump's latest action takes that influence to new extremes. Freezing assets is not only a blow to China's financial strength, it's a direct challenge to their position in the global economic hierarchy. In response, China has already signaled that they won't back down without a fight. The next few weeks and months will determine whether this conflict escalates into a full-blown trade war or if a diplomatic solution can be reached. But one thing is clear: Trump has set a dangerous precedent, and other countries may now follow suit, potentially causing ripple effects across global markets. But what does all of this mean for you? For businesses, investors, and everyday citizens, the stakes have never been higher. Economic uncertainty is the name of the game, and with Trump's decision, the rules of the game are rapidly changing. How will the markets respond? How will your investments be impacted? And more importantly, how can you prepare for the fallout? This is where things get really interesting. While we can't predict exactly how this will unfold, it's clear that we're witnessing a shift in how global powers interact with one another. The potential for economic turmoil is real, and the consequences of these actions could be felt for years to come. The ripple effects will likely reach far beyond the US and China, touching every corner of the globe. We want to hear your thoughts on this unprecedented move. Do you think Trump's decision was the right one, or is this going too far? Drop your comments below and let us know what you think. And don't forget to hit that like button if you found this video insightful, and subscribe to stay updated on all the latest developments. Trust us, you don't want to miss what's coming next. The shocking move, freezing Chinese assets. When we talk about the power players of the world, China has always been in the mix, a nation with an economy so large and influential that its actions echo through the entire globe. But now, something has shifted. Donald Trump, once again, has stunned the world by taking a move that no one expected, freezing Chinese assets. This isn't just another chapter in the long-standing U.S. China trade war. It's a seismic shift in how these two giants interact, and the effects could be felt for years to come. The stakes are higher than ever before, and the consequences, if not carefully managed, could spiral into a global crisis. For those who have been following the trade wars, it's no surprise that tensions between the U.S. and China have been building for years. The tariffs, the accusations of intellectual property theft, and the constant back and forth have all been part of a larger chess game. But this move by Trump, it's different. This is no longer about negotiating over trade deals or enforcing tariffs. This is about direct, deliberate action that could potentially cripple a nation's financial position. Freezing Chinese assets means shutting off access to billions, if not trillions of dollars, that China controls in global markets. Think about that for a second. China is one of the largest holders of U.S. debt, and the financial repercussions of this decision could have far-reaching effects. But why now? Why take such an extreme action? It's no secret that Trump has been on a mission to challenge China's dominance on the world stage. His administration has often criticized China for unfair trade practices, currency manipulation, and its growing influence in global affairs. Yet freezing assets crosses a line. This is not a move that can be easily undone. This is a declaration of economic warfare, and it's likely to have repercussions that ripple through both economies in ways we cannot yet fully predict. Imagine the chaos that could ensue. Chinese companies could find themselves locked out of U.S. financial markets, their ability to access international trade and investment severely restricted. The impact on the Chinese economy could be devastating, leading to a sharp decline in its growth, destabilizing the markets, and possibly triggering a financial crisis. But it's not just China that could suffer. The U.S. could find itself caught in the crossfire. China, with its vast influence over the global economy, could retaliate by pulling back on its U.S. investments, dumping U.S. treasuries, or even targeting American companies in China. The U.S. is far from immune in this high-stakes game, and Trump's move may set off a chain of events that neither nation can control. Now think about how the rest of the world is reacting. Countries that rely on China for trade, resources, or investment are watching closely. European nations, emerging markets, and even other global superpowers like Russia may have to pick sides in this escalating conflict. The financial world is intertwined, and no country can remain unaffected by a direct clash between the world's two largest economies. What happens when the world's economic leaders go head-to-head? Are we on the brink of a new financial order? Or is this just the beginning of a dangerous escalation that could lead to full-blown economic warfare? The world doesn't know the answer yet, but it's a question that's on everyone's mind. And here's where things get even more interesting. As Trump takes this bold step, he's not just challenging China. He's setting a new precedent for how the U.S. will interact with its rivals in the 21st century. This is a message to other global powers that the old rules no longer apply. Economic dominance isn't just about trade agreements or sanctions. It's about wielding the financial tools at your disposal with ruthless efficiency. By freezing Chinese assets, Trump is sending a message to the rest of the world that the U.S. is willing to play by a new set of rules that could reshape the entire global economy. But the real question remains, what's next? What will China do in response to this unprecedented act? What kind of fallout can we expect in the coming months and years? No one knows for sure, but one thing is certain. Trump has set the stage for something bigger than we've seen before. The world is on edge, and it's impossible to predict where this will lead. What do you think? Will this action make the US stronger in its global position, or is it a dangerous gamble that could spiral out of control? Drop a comment below and let us know your thoughts. Do you believe that Trump's decision was necessary, or do you think it's just an overreaction? Leave your opinion and let's discuss the long-term consequences of this dramatic shift in global politics. The economic consequences for China. As the news breaks that Trump has taken the bold and drastic step of freezing Chinese assets, the world is left in suspense, wondering what the immediate and long-term consequences will be for China. The magnitude of this decision cannot be understated. It's not just a political move, it's a direct attack on China's financial backbone. China, as one of the largest global economic powers, is highly dependent on its assets being able to move freely across the world's financial systems. Trump's decision to freeze those assets threatens to paralyze much of the economic activity that sustains China's growth. But what does that really mean? China has spent decades building a massive web of influence in the global economy, holding vast amounts of assets in foreign markets and developing complex trade relationships that support its manufacturing and technology industries. Trump's move cuts right into that web, potentially causing a ripple effect that could take down more than just the Chinese economy. With billions, if not trillions, of dollars frozen in global markets, Chinese companies and the government itself could find themselves without the ability to access vital resources. For a country that relies heavily on foreign investment, trade, and debt to fuel its rapid development, this freezing of assets could be catastrophic. But let's consider the broader picture. China's financial clout extends far beyond its borders. The country is a major player in the global supply chain, and much of the world relies on China for everything from cheap goods to critical resources like rare earth metals. If Trump's decision restricts China's ability to engage with international markets, the entire global economy could feel the repercussions. Think about the billions of dollars in trade that cross borders every day. If Chinese assets are suddenly frozen, that trade could come to a screeching halt. In turn, this would cause major disruptions in industries that depend on Chinese goods, from electronics to manufacturing. For consumers around the world, that means potentially higher prices and shortages of essential products. For businesses, it could mean an inability to produce goods, a decline in profits, or even bankruptcy. The broader economic impact could be devastating. The freezing of Chinese assets doesn't just hurt China's economy. It threatens to destabilize the delicate balance of the global financial system. China has built up massive foreign reserves to defend against financial crises, and much of that wealth is tied up in foreign investments, including U.S. Treasury bonds. By cutting off access to those assets, Trump may be triggering a chain reaction that forces China to rethink its entire strategy. Will they retaliate by pulling their investments out of the US and other markets? What happens if China starts selling off its holdings in US debt, potentially causing a collapse in global markets? The fear is that a move like this could lead to economic turmoil on a scale we've never seen before. Another consequence to consider is the potential rise in global tensions. China is not a country that will sit idly by when its economic foundation is under attack. With a population of over 4 billion and one of the world's largest military forces, China has the power to retaliate in ways that could send shockwaves through international relations. We could see a sharp escalation in trade wars, tariffs, and other forms of economic retaliation. But beyond trade, China could also target American companies operating within its borders, forcing them to scale back their operations or leave altogether. Major tech giants like Apple, Google, and Tesla all have significant operations in China, and a freeze on assets could limit their ability to do business there. This would not only hurt these companies' bottom lines, but it could also affect the global supply chain that relies on China for production. What does this mean for the average person living in the US? China or anywhere else, the short-term impact might be the most visible: rising prices for goods, disruptions in the supply chain, and a potential slowdown in global growth. But the long-term effects could be even more profound. As China struggles to recover from the freeze, the global economic order may shift. In this new reality, the U.S. could solidify its position as the dominant global economic power, but at what cost? Would the international community back the U.S. in its decision, or would it seek to distance itself from a nation willing to take such extreme measures? The ripple effects of Trump's decision are already being felt, but they could intensify as China scrambles to find a way to respond. If the U.S. continues to escalate the situation, what happens next? Will the international community step in to broker peace, or will we see a global showdown unlike anything we've seen before? The world is on edge, and everyone is wondering, will this be the turning point that defines the future of global economics? What are your thoughts on the potential fallout from Trump freezing Chinese assets? How do you think China will respond, and what will be the consequences for the global economy? Drop a comment below and let us know what you think. Also, share with us any predictions or concerns you have about the economic future in light of these developments. Let's talk about it. U.S. strategy: a new level of aggression. With Trump's decision to freeze Chinese assets, the landscape of international relations has shifted dramatically. No longer are we dealing with just the traditional back and forth of diplomacy and trade deals. This is a new form of economic warfare, one that signals the U.S. is willing to take its fight with China to a level that many didn't expect. The move is not just about imposing sanctions or tariffs. It's a direct strike against the very financial infrastructure that China has spent decades building. For the U.S., it represents a new era of aggression, where global power dynamics are reshaped not just through political influence, but through economic muscle. What is the reasoning behind such an audacious step? Trump has long positioned himself as a president willing to challenge the status quo, and this decision is no different. For years, U.S. officials have criticized China for its unfair trade practices, intellectual property theft, and what many see as its manipulation of international markets. But freezing assets is something entirely new. This is a direct confrontation with China's economic power, a calculated move that could undermine China's influence on the world stage. The U.S. is signaling that it is no longer content with a merely defensive posture when it comes to global competition. Instead, it's actively seeking to reclaim the economic dominance it once held. In a sense, this could be viewed as a bold attempt to level the playing field. For decades, China has been growing its economic footprint, amassing significant control over global supply chains, manufacturing, and trade. Trump's move is an attempt to cut China down to size, to rein in its expansion, and to send a clear message that the U.S. will no longer tolerate what it views as China's unchecked rise. But the question is this the right strategy? Is it sustainable, or is it a dangerous gamble that could backfire? While Trump's decision might appear to be a move for the U.S. to regain its competitive edge, it is also a highly risky strategy. Freezing assets is a blunt force maneuver that could have unintended consequences for the U.S. itself. While the Chinese economy is certainly vulnerable to this kind of financial pressure, the U.S. is not immune. The interconnectedness of global markets means that what happens in China doesn't just stay in China. A financial blow to China could quickly boomerang back to the U.S. in the form of market instability, inflation, or even a crisis of confidence in the U.S. dollar. After all, China holds a large amount of U.S. debt. If the country decides to pull back or sell off its holdings in response to this asset freeze, it could trigger a chain reaction that impacts U.S. financial markets and global trade. Moreover, there's the issue of trust. Trump's aggressive stance on China, while popular with some in the U.S., could alienate key allies who rely on stable economic relations with China. Many countries in Europe, Latin America, and Asia have significant trade ties with China, and the US could find itself isolated if it continues down this path of unilateral economic aggression. Even nations that share the US's concern over China's economic practices may hesitate to support such a drastic and disruptive action, fearing the broader consequences. One of the key challenges with this strategy is that it forces countries to choose sides. In a world where alliances are becoming increasingly fluid, this could be the spark that ignites a new era of geopolitical fragmentation. Countries that have been hesitant to pick between the US and China may now be forced to make a decision. Will they stand with the US in freezing Chinese assets, or will they align themselves with China in defiance of American aggression? The ripple effects of this decision could lead to realignment on the global stage, where economic and political alliances shift and nations begin to position themselves for a new global order. Another layer to consider is the psychological impact of such a bold move. Trump's aggressive stance might embolden other nations to take similar steps in their own geopolitical struggles. Countries that feel sidelined by traditional global powers may see this as an opportunity to assert their own economic or political interests through similar measures. This could lead to a rise in economic protectionism, where nations turn inward and prioritize their own self-interests at the expense of global cooperation. If this trend takes hold, it could lead to a fractured global economy, where nations are less willing to collaborate and more focused on protecting their own interests. For Trump, this is a risky gambit. He's betting that the US can withstand the fallout from freezing Chinese assets, and that China's economy will suffer enough to force a negotiation or shift in the global power structure. But what happens if this strategy fails? What if China does not buckle under the pressure and instead retaliates with its own aggressive moves? The risk of escalation is real, and as the situation continues to unfold, the world will be watching to see whether the US's new approach to global dominance pays off, or if it spirals into something much more dangerous. The world's financial systems are intricately connected, and no country can act in isolation. The tension between the US and China is not just about trade tariffs or intellectual property. It's about control of the future of global economics. Trump's decision has set a new tone, one where aggression is no longer something that happens behind closed doors, but is played out in full view of the world. The question now is how far this will go and what the ultimate consequences will be for the global order. What do you think about the US? This aggressive new approach to dealing with China? Do you think it will ultimately strengthen America's position, or could it backfire in ways we're not yet anticipating? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know if you believe this will reshape global geopolitics, or if it's just another dangerous gamble. Potential backlash: China's response to Trump. As Trump's move to freeze Chinese assets reverberates across the globe, one of the most pressing questions becomes, how will China respond? The answer to this question could have far-reaching consequences not just for the US, but for the entire global economic system. When you challenge a nation as powerful as China, you're not just poking a bear, you're engaging in a high-stakes game of geopolitical chess with massive financial stakes. While the US may believe that this bold move will force China to bow to its will, it's highly unlikely that China will simply roll over without putting up a fight. China's response could come in many forms, each one potentially as disruptive as the original decision to freeze its assets. First and foremost, we must acknowledge the fact that China holds vast amounts of US debt, about $1 trillion worth of US Treasury bonds. In the past, the possibility of China selling off this debt has been floated as a potential weapon in the trade war between the two countries. If China were to act on that threat, it could trigger a chain reaction that could bring down global financial markets, potentially leading to a sharp depreciation of the US dollar. Given the amount of US debt China holds, Such an action would send shockwaves through not just the U.S. economy, but also global stock markets. Investors around the world would be forced to re-evaluate their portfolios, and the entire global economic system could be sent into turmoil. Beyond financial retaliation, China also has the option of using its considerable influence in the global supply chain as a weapon. China is the world's largest manufacturer and has vast control over the production of key goods and raw materials, from electronics to rare earth metals, which are critical for the production of everything from smartphones to electric car batteries. With its grip on these vital industries, China could use its power to disrupt global supply chains, potentially leading to shortages and price hikes for goods worldwide. If China were to intentionally limit the supply of goods or resources, it could create significant economic pain for countries that rely on Chinese manufacturing. The global economy, already shaken by Trump's move, would face further disruption, possibly driving inflation rates up and hurting consumer purchasing power across many nations. Another potential area for retaliation is China's vast market. The Chinese consumer base is one of the largest and fastest growing in the world. U.S. companies, from Apple to Nike, have built their businesses around access to China's consumers. If China were to retaliate by restricting the operations of U.S. businesses within its borders, it could deal a major blow to these companies' profits. Imagine major American tech giants like Google, Apple, and Microsoft being unable to access the world's largest consumer market. These companies would not only suffer financially, but their global supply chains would be severely disrupted as well. If China were to impose restrictions on American companies operating within its borders, it could be a devastating blow to the U.S. economy, further exacerbating the damage caused by the asset freeze. Then there's the issue of political retaliation. While the financial and economic fallout is a very real concern, China also has the ability to use its political and diplomatic leverage to counteract Trump's decision. China has powerful allies across the world, including in Europe, Africa, and parts of Asia. If China were to rally its allies to its cause, it could create a formidable coalition that could challenge U.S. dominance in international institutions like the United Nations or the World Trade Organization. By aligning itself with other nations that feel threatened by U.S. hegemony, China could shift the balance of global power, making it more difficult for the U.S. to act unilaterally in the future. The global community is already divided on the issue of China's rise as a superpower. Some countries have long been wary of China's growing influence and have supported the U.S. in its stance against Chinese economic practices. However, others see China as a rising force that could offer a counterbalance to American global dominance. If Trump's move forces China to mobilize its allies in a way that undermines U.S. interests, the geopolitical landscape could shift dramatically. This kind of backlash could lead to a new era of multipolarity, where global power is distributed among several key players rather than being dominated by the U.S. and its Western allies. On top of all this, there's the question of China's internal politics. The Chinese government, led by President Xi Jinping, has long emphasized the importance of national pride and sovereignty. Xi's leadership is built on a narrative of China's resurgence as a global power, and any perceived insult to the nation's standing on the world stage could be viewed as an attack on his leadership. In this context, a strong response to Trump's asset freeze would not just be about protecting China's economy, but also about reinforcing the government's legitimacy. A failure to respond decisively could weaken Xi Jinping's authority, both domestically and internationally, while a strong countermeasure would solidify his position as a leader willing to defend China's interests at any cost. The Chinese government is not known for being passive in the face of perceived slights, and given the high stakes of this confrontation, it's almost certain that China will react in some way. What form that response will take remains to be seen, but one thing is clear: Trump's decision to freeze Chinese assets has set the stage for a tense and potentially volatile period in U.S. China relations. As both sides brace for the fallout, the world waits to see whether this will mark the beginning of a new Cold War or if a diplomatic resolution can be reached before the situation spirals further out of control. What do you think China's response will be? How far do you think they'll go to counteract this bold move by Trump? Drop your comments below, and let's discuss the potential fallout from this game-changing decision. Would you agree with China's potential responses, or do you believe this could escalate even further? Let us know your thoughts. The global reaction. Allies and adversaries. Weigh in. As the shockwaves from Trump's decision to freeze Chinese assets continue to ripple across the globe, one of the most critical questions that arises is, how will the rest of the world react? This isn't just a matter of U.S. China relations anymore. The actions taken by one of the world's largest economies are bound to have a far-reaching impact, and other nations are not going to stand by idly as this situation unfolds. With global trade relationships on the line, we're about to witness a series of complex diplomatic and economic calculations that could reshape the global order in ways we've never seen before. First, let's consider the U.S.'s traditional allies. These countries, which include the United Kingdom, Japan, Germany, and Canada, have long been partners of the U.S. in economic and military matters. They are closely tied to the U.S. economy and share common interests in global security and trade. However, Trump's decision to freeze Chinese assets puts these nations in a difficult position. While many of these countries are also concerned about China's growing economic influence and unfair trade practices, they also have strong economic ties with China. The European Union, for instance, has deep financial and trade relationships with China, and China is a crucial market for European exports. Germany, the EU's largest economy, has vast investments in China, particularly in the automotive and manufacturing sectors. If the U.S. continues down this path of aggressive economic tactics, European nations may find themselves at a crossroads. Do they align themselves with the U.S., or do they risk damaging their own economic interests by taking a stronger stance against Trump's policies? The global economic system is interdependent, and any move that risks destabilizing one of its most significant players, China, threatens to pull the entire system into disarray. In this environment, countries like Germany and France may hesitate to take a side in the conflict, fearing that overt support for the U.S. could cause irreparable damage to their relationship with China. The decision of whether to support or oppose Trump's policies will be a delicate balancing act for many of America's traditional allies, as they weigh the potential short-term financial losses against the long-term geopolitical implications. Even though they may agree with Trump's stance on China's trade practices, these nations may be reluctant to support such an extreme and unilateral action, particularly when it puts their own economies in jeopardy. But what about China's adversaries? Countries that have long been wary of China's rise on the global stage, such as India and Australia, may find themselves in a more favorable position to support Trump's actions. India, with its growing economic and strategic ties to the U.S., it has already expressed concerns about China's dominance in Asia, particularly in the South China Sea and along its border with India. Australia, a key U.S. ally, has also grown increasingly wary of China's expanding influence in the Pacific region. For these countries, Trump's decision may be seen as a necessary step in reasserting balance in the global order, where China's economic and military power has threatened to overshadow regional dynamics. India, in particular, may view this as a moment to strengthen its own economic ties with the U.S. and assert its role as a counterbalance to China in Asia. However, even for these nations, the situation is far from straightforward. While they may share concerns about China's global rise, they are not immune to the economic consequences of Trump's aggressive stance. India, for instance, relies heavily on trade with China, particularly in sectors like technology, pharmaceuticals, and agriculture. Australia is also heavily reliant on China for its exports, especially in mining and natural resources. A significant disruption in China's economy could result in immediate trade losses for these nations, which means that while they may privately support some of Trump's aims, they are unlikely to fully endorse actions that could destabilize their own economic interests. And then there's the question of global markets. How will the world's financial markets react to the freezing of Chinese assets? The markets are always looking for stability, and this move has introduced a significant level of uncertainty. Investors around the world are already on edge, and the ripple effects of such a drastic decision could lead to volatility in stock prices, a weakening of the global supply chain, and a slowdown in global economic growth. Countries that rely on free trade and open markets may find themselves facing increased risks and tighter restrictions on their financial activities. As uncertainty mounts, the prospect of recession or economic downturn becomes more real, and countries that are heavily reliant on the global financial system may feel the pressure. The decision to freeze Chinese assets has, without a doubt, altered the playing field. Countries will need to reassess their strategies in response to this unpredictable new reality. In addition to these economic and political considerations, there is also the issue of global security. While the U.S. and China have engaged in a trade war for some time, the freezing of Chinese assets represents a new chapter in a much broader geopolitical struggle. China has long viewed itself as a rising superpower, and its ambitions extend well beyond economics. The freezing of assets may push China to retaliate not just economically, but militarily as well. The South China Sea, Taiwan, and its territorial claims in the region could become flashpoints for further escalation. If China feels cornered by this latest action, it could take more aggressive actions in regions where it already holds strategic interests, leading to a larger and more dangerous global confrontation. Countries that are aligned with the U.S. may be forced to choose whether they are willing to support the U.S. in the event that these tensions escalate into military conflict. With all these factors in play, it's clear that the global reaction to Trump's decision will not be simple or uniform. Countries that are traditional U.S. allies may be forced to reassess their loyalties, while adversaries like India and Australia may find themselves drawn into the conflict. In the end, the world is watching closely, and the next steps taken by these nations will shape the future of global geopolitics and economics. How will this standoff between the U.S. and China reshape the future of trade, diplomacy, and international relations? What do you think? Do you believe the global community will rally behind the U.S., or will many nations distance themselves from this bold move? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and share how you think the situation will unfold. Do you think this marks the beginning of a new era in global diplomacy, or will it end in a major international crisis? Let's hear your predictions. Impact on U.S. economy and investors. While much of the focus around Trump's decision to freeze Chinese assets has been on the potential fallout for China, it's crucial not to overlook the repercussions for the U.S. itself. The reality is, no major economic move happens in isolation, and the effects of this aggressive tactic will undoubtedly ripple through the U.S. economy. What many may not realize is that, in the short term, this could cause more harm to the American economy than it does to China's. One of the first areas where we're likely to see significant impact is in the financial markets. The interconnectedness of global finance means that when China's financial system is targeted, it doesn't just affect Chinese companies. It has direct consequences for U.S. investors, businesses, and financial institutions. The freezing of Chinese assets could trigger a mass sell-off in global stock markets as investors panic about the stability of one of the world's largest economies. If Chinese companies suddenly find themselves unable to access U.S. markets or financial systems, their ability to operate on the global stage could be severely compromised. U.S. investors who hold stock in these companies or in funds that are heavily invested in Chinese markets could see their portfolios take a significant hit. The effects on American retirement savings, stock portfolios, and other investments could be devastating, leading to a potential loss of billions, if not trillions of dollars in wealth. But the consequences for the U.S. economy go far beyond Wall Street. As China's economy slows down in response to this move, it's not just Chinese businesses that will suffer. U.S. companies that rely on Chinese production and exports are likely to face increased costs and delays. From technology companies to manufacturers, many U.S. businesses depend on Chinese factories to produce goods at a lower cost. With China's economic power curtailed by the freezing of its assets, these companies may face disruptions in supply chains, delays in production, and rising costs. For consumers, this could mean higher prices on everyday goods, from electronics to clothing. The ripple effect would hit American households directly as inflation climbs and the cost of living increases. Additionally, the freeze on Chinese assets could exacerbate the growing trade imbalances that already exist between the U.S. and China. China holds a massive amount of U.S. Treasury bonds, and its decision to retaliate by selling off these bonds could result in a sharp increase in interest rates. The U.S. government could find itself facing higher borrowing costs, leading to further fiscal strain. For American consumers, this could translate into higher mortgage rates, higher car loan rates, and more expensive credit card payments. The increase in borrowing costs would make it harder for individuals and businesses to access affordable credit, potentially slowing down consumer spending and investment. The American agricultural sector is also likely to face some of the most immediate fallout. China is one of the largest importers of American agricultural products, including soybeans, pork, and corn. A direct hit to China's economy could lead to a reduction in demand for these goods, leaving American farmers with unsold products and declining revenue. This would be especially problematic for rural areas of the U.S., where the agricultural industry plays a critical role in the economy. The repercussions of a collapse in agricultural exports to China would be felt at the local level, potentially leading to widespread job losses and economic hardship in farming communities. Another key aspect of this scenario is the potential disruption to the tech industry. U.S. technology companies like Apple, Microsoft, and Google are deeply embedded in the Chinese market, both as consumers and as manufacturers. If China's economy is severely impacted by this freeze, the tech sector could see a sharp decline in profits. American companies that rely on Chinese labor and manufacturing could face skyrocketing costs as they're forced to find alternative supply sources or pass the increased costs on to consumers. For tech companies, which operate on thin margins and rely heavily on international markets, this could be a major blow. What happens if production costs soar and the demand for U.S. tech products in China plummets? Companies like Apple, which rely on Chinese factories to assemble their products, would face delays and price hikes that could make their goods less competitive globally. The most immediate concern for U.S. businesses is the uncertainty. When a major policy decision like this is made, it shakes up the predictability of the global market. If this freeze continues to escalate, businesses will be forced to make critical decisions about their investments, workforce, and supply chains. Uncertainty can be deadly to an economy, as it leads to reduced investment, lower consumer confidence, and decreased spending. As businesses and consumers pull back in response to the instability, the U.S. economy could see a slowdown, which would in turn affect job growth and the overall prosperity of the country. We also can't ignore the psychological aspect of this move. Trump's decision to freeze Chinese assets is a bold declaration of economic war, and it sends a signal to global investors that the U.S. is willing to take extreme actions in its economic conflicts. This could lead to a crisis of confidence, where investors begin to question the stability of the U.S. financial system. If confidence in the U.S. economy begins to erode, investors could pull their money out of American markets, leading to further instability and a potential economic downturn. What's at stake here is more than just financial markets and trade. Trump's decision represents a major shift in how the U.S. engages with the global economy. It's a gamble with far-reaching consequences, and the stakes could not be higher. As the situation continues to unfold, we're left wondering, will this aggressive strategy pay off, or will it result in an economic nightmare for the U.S.? What do you think? Do you believe the U.S. economy can weather the storm of this asset freeze, or will it be hurt more than we expect? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's talk about how these moves could reshape the financial landscape. Do you see any other impacts on the American economy that haven't been discussed? Let us know what you think. The long-term effects on global markets. As we continue to process the magnitude of Trump's decision to freeze Chinese assets, it's becoming increasingly clear that this move will not only disrupt the immediate financial landscape, but will likely shape the course of global markets for years to come. The interconnectedness of global economies means that when one major player is targeted, the ripples spread out far and wide, affecting markets, businesses, and everyday citizens all around the world. What is happening right now is a pivotal moment in the ongoing reconfiguration of the global economic order. Trump's bold stance against China is not just a fleeting moment of tension, it's a signal that global markets, as we know them, may never be the same again. One of the first areas where we'll see the long-term effects is in the flow of capital. The freezing of Chinese assets sends a clear message that no nation is safe from economic attack, regardless of its size or influence. What this could mean for global investors is a fundamental shift in how they view markets and risk. As countries around the world assess their positions in relation to the U.S. and China, there may be a significant pullback from emerging markets or markets perceived as being vulnerable to similar actions. Investors who once felt comfortable in a global economy with relatively predictable outcomes may now become more cautious, reallocating their assets into safer, less volatile options. This could lead to a shift away from risky emerging markets into traditional safe havens like gold, U.S. Treasury bonds, or even cryptocurrency. In the wake of this freeze, the global financial system could experience a significant restructuring. The U.S. dollar has long been the world's reserve currency, providing countries with a reliable store of value and a medium for international trade. However, with Trump's decision to freeze Chinese assets, there's a very real possibility that the global financial system will start to lose faith in the stability of the U.S. dollar. Countries that are increasingly skeptical of U.S. policy may begin to seek alternatives to the dollar, which could include turning to the euro, the Chinese yuan, or even establishing their own regional currencies to facilitate trade. This could significantly weaken the dollar's dominance in global trade, triggering a long-term decline in its value. For the U.S., this would be a catastrophic blow, as it would lose its leverage in global trade negotiations and its ability to exert financial pressure on other countries. What's also at play here is the shift in global trade relationships. The world economy is increasingly characterized by complex, interdependent trade networks, where goods, services, and capital flow freely between nations. But Trump's decision to freeze Chinese assets has created an environment of uncertainty, where nations will begin to reconsider their positions in these networks. Countries that once relied heavily on China for trade and investment may now look for alternatives, either by seeking new trading partners or by looking inward to bolster their own economies. This could lead to the rise of new economic blocs, as countries band together to mitigate the risks of an unpredictable global market. We could see the formation of new trade agreements and partnerships that bypass China or the U.S. altogether resulting in the fragmentation of the global trade system into competing spheres of influence. This fragmentation of global trade networks would have far-reaching implications for businesses operating across borders. Global supply chains are already under strain, and any additional disruption could push companies to rethink their strategies and operations. Multinational companies, which rely on the ability to source materials and labor from different parts of the world, could find themselves caught in a complex web of trade barriers and tariffs. For instance, if businesses in the U.S. can no longer rely on Chinese suppliers, they will be forced to find new sources of production, which could drive up costs and slow down the pace of innovation. On the other hand, Chinese companies who rely on access to international markets to grow could face significant barriers to expansion, curbing their ability to compete on the world stage. As nations begin to reconfigure their economic strategies, it's possible that we could see an acceleration of deglobalization, a process where countries shift away from interconnected global markets and focus more on self-sufficiency. The idea of building domestic industries and reducing reliance on foreign trade is not new, but Trump's decision to freeze Chinese assets could spur a new wave of protectionism. Countries may start focusing on increasing domestic production, strengthening their own supply chains, and reducing their dependence on foreign goods and services. This would be a significant shift from the globalization we've seen over the past few decades, where businesses and governments have prioritized international trade and cooperation. The result could be slower global growth and increased economic isolation as nations turn inward to focus on their own industries. The long-term effects will not be confined to just trade or investment. This freeze could also have profound effects on the geopolitical landscape. Nations that are directly impacted by these financial moves will have to adapt their foreign policies accordingly. For example, countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America that rely on Chinese infrastructure investments may face challenges if Chinese companies are no longer able to operate or invest at the same scale. In response, these nations may turn to other economic powers like the U.S. or Europe to fill the void left by China, leading to a redistribution of global economic influence. But perhaps the most dramatic shift could be in the international institutions that govern trade, finance, and diplomacy. With the US and China at odds, we could see a realignment within organizations like the World Trade Organization, WTO, or the International Monetary Fund, IMF. Countries that align themselves with either the US or China could push for reforms within these institutions, seeking to shape global rules in their favor. The dynamics within these bodies could become increasingly polarized, leading to a less cooperative and more fragmented global governance system. All of these factors will converge to create a world that is far more unpredictable and volatile than it is today. As nations reassess their economic positions, businesses rethink their global strategies, and investors search for safer assets, the global economic landscape will be permanently altered. The freeze on Chinese assets, while a singular event, will set off a chain of reactions that could last for decades. We're witnessing the beginning of a fundamental shift in the way global economies interact with one another. How do you see these long-term changes affecting global markets? Do you think the world will fragment into competing economic blocs, or will global trade find a way to adapt? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's discuss how these seismic shifts could change the future of the global economy. What do you think the long-term consequences will be for businesses, investors, and governments alike? Let us know your thoughts. Is Trump losing control? As we continue to digest the monumental decision by Trump to freeze Chinese assets, one question lingers in the air. Is Trump losing control of his policies, or is this the calculated move of a master strategist? In many ways, this action is as bold as it is risky, but the implications are complex. At first glance, it may seem like an act of sheer defiance, But as we peel back the layers of this decision, we begin to wonder whether this is the final act of someone who is slowly unraveling, or the precise stroke of a political genius determined to reshape the global balance of power. On the one hand, Trump's move could be seen as the culmination of years of aggressive rhetoric against China, the trade wars, the tariffs, and the strained diplomatic relations. For those who have watched Trump over the years, it might not seem all that surprising. He has consistently prided himself on taking unorthodox and bold steps that disrupt the status quo, even if it means risking chaos in the process. Yet, on the other hand, the magnitude of freezing Chinese assets is unlike anything he's done before. This is a decision that goes far beyond trade talks or tariffs. It's a direct financial assault on China's economic system, and such an action comes with consequences that are hard to predict. There's a fine line between being a disruptive force in politics and making a reckless decision that could trigger unintended repercussions. For all of his success in shaking up the global political order, there are signs that Trump is losing his grip on the finer details of global diplomacy. The United States' position on the world stage has been increasingly scrutinized, with some allies growing weary of Trump's erratic decision-making style. The decision to freeze Chinese assets, while certainly bold, may alienate crucial allies who have long supported the U.S. in global matters. The uncertainty created by this policy shift is destabilizing, and nations around the world will have to decide whether they are willing to follow the U.S. in this high-risk game or distance themselves from such a drastic move. Trump's unpredictability is one of his trademarks, but in international relations, stability and consistency are often just as valuable as boldness. If his actions continue to create global turbulence, it might push countries into a position where they no longer see the U.S. as the leader of the free world, but rather as a rogue power acting in isolation. Another point to consider is how this drastic move plays out on the home front. Trump's base has always rallied around his image as a fighter, someone who's not afraid to take on global giants like China. But as tensions rise and the economic fallout from this decision becomes more apparent, there could be a shift in domestic opinion. While many Americans may support tough action against China, the impact on U.S. jobs, inflation, and financial markets could begin to weigh heavily on public sentiment. If U.S. businesses are hit by rising production costs, if American consumers feel the sting of price hikes, or if the stock market takes a dive, the political calculus could change. Trump, who has long relied on his ability to project strength and control, could find himself facing increasing pressure at home as the economic consequences of this decision unfold. The question of whether Trump is losing control also comes down to his broader vision for America's role in the world. Is this move part of a grand strategy to reassert U.S. dominance, or is it the result of impulsive decision-making without fully grasping the long-term risks? Trump has often spoken about America first, but what does that really mean in a globalized world where economies are intertwined? By taking an action that directly threatens China's financial stability, Trump is making a definitive statement about the U.S.'s role in the global economy. But in doing so, he risks alienating allies and destabilizing international systems that have been in place for decades. While he may feel that he is putting America's interests first, it's unclear whether this will ultimately secure the country's future prosperity or open the door to more economic and geopolitical instability. It's also important to ask, is this an isolated move, or is it a part of a larger pattern? Trump's actions have often been unpredictable, and his approach to diplomacy and trade has left many wondering whether there is a coherent strategy behind it all. For instance, the escalating tensions with Iran, the shifting stance on NATO, and the abandonment of long-standing trade agreements all point to a president who is willing to dismantle old alliances and norms in favor of a more unilateral approach. While some view this as refreshing and necessary in a world where traditional power structures are no longer effective, others see it as reckless and short-sighted. The decision to freeze Chinese assets could be seen as part of this larger pattern of unpredictable moves designed to shake up global dynamics, but it also brings into focus the risks of such an approach. When the president's decisions seem based on impulse rather than a calculated strategy, it raises concerns about the stability and direction of U.S. foreign policy. What's clear is that Trump is taking a gamble, one that could pay off or backfire dramatically. If China buckles under the pressure, if the U.S. emerges victorious in reasserting its dominance on the global stage, he could secure his place as a bold and decisive leader who reshaped the international order. However, if the situation escalates into a global financial crisis, or if China finds a way to retaliate in a way that undermines U.S. interests, Trump could find himself facing an unprecedented political and economic crisis that he may not be able to control. In many ways, the world is watching, not just to see how this situation plays out, but to understand what it says about Trump's leadership and his ability to navigate the complexities of global power. As tensions rise and the stakes get higher, we have to ask, is this the beginning of the end for Trump's global vision, or is this simply another chapter in his unpredictable presidency? The coming weeks and months will reveal just how far Trump is willing to push this conflict and whether he can maintain control of a situation that threatens to spiral beyond anyone's expectations. What do you think? Is Trump losing control of his policies, or is this part of a larger, more calculated strategy to reshape the global order? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about how this could impact the future of U.S. leadership and global diplomacy. If you've made it this far, we want to hear how this video has touched your heart. Please comment below. I like the content and share how this message has resonated with you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to keep receiving transformative content. Leave a like to support this mission and, of course, watch the next video, which is already showing on the end screen. May God bless your life powerfully. Thank you for being part of this journey with us.